Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. Let's get started. 4 minutes late, and more people will join us. But yeah, here we are. Thanks a lot for being together here for the 13th and not bad luck, meaning I hope uh, Monday open consultation. Um, it is good to mark a transition today. I mean, it's painful at the same time, but also a positive new beginning as FOGGS is slowly winding down its activities and handing over some parts of its work and series and assets to other good colleagues who share the same principles and the same good priorities and causes as we do. It's a long story why FOGGS is closing down, but we hope that we offered something positive during these 13 years of existence of the foundation. And we will be there as a legacy platform to hopefully inspire people in the future with what we did, what we tried to do. And our networks will continue, our friends will continue to carry the flag of global governance and human-centered cooperation. But we have to go as an institution. Individually, you continue to see us. This is one instance today of one of the assets of FOGGS being handed over to another institution, actually a network, the Global South Perspectives Network, which has been up to now convened by the ISI, the Inclusive Society Institute of South Africa, Humaniza.com of Brazil, and FOGGS, based in Belgium, in Brussels. We will leave as institutional convener, but the other two will continue. And to mark this, the topic today is Global South Perspectives on the United Nations. And our topic introducer, keynote speaker, but also a facilitator of this discussion is Dr. Klaus Kodze. I asked him to switch on his camera. There he is. Oh, yes, he is there. Sorry. Klaus is an associate and experienced researcher and analyst of the Inclusive Society Institute of South Africa, based in Cape Town. So please, Klaus, we are in your hands.
Well, thank you very much, Georgios. Very safe pair of hands that you're handing over from. And I look forward to not only this session, but going forward with these consultations and all the other activities. So good afternoon, everybody from Cape Town. And very happy that we have, I see 21 participants. And as I said, I look forward to a very good discussion. This is what it's about, the consultation, to hear everybody's views. So discussing the Global South perspectives of the United Nations today as a core, and I will just lead in with a few minutes of remarks. So the United Nations, of course, celebrating the 80th year after being founded, and it was found after, as we all know, after the ravages of the World War II, and that the United Nations was set up to establish peace, security, development all around the world, and serve as a stabilizing force and as a locus for multilateralism. However, increasingly is coming under pressure as outdated, as not serving the needs of the world, and as being criticized as being ineffective, not least from the Global South, which we regard more of a geopolitical term than a geographic, as we can discuss also what does the Global South mean in our conversation. But many of the countries of the Global South were weak or marginal or even late at the time of joining the United Nations, with little agency or responsibility in establishing the organizational structure. They have increasingly been raising their voices as they have becoming more powerful demographically, economically, in the regions. And so the question is, how does the growth translate, or the development of these countries translate into the United Nations? And we see that the global south, many global south countries are no longer to be willing to be passengers in a Western-centric world, which for in all views really can be considered to be gone. This unipolar moment, if there ever was such a time. But the question is, what happens then? The moment as we are in, the question is to gain equitable influence and agency. What are these views from the global south? So just from this year's United Nations General Assembly, just a few perspectives from some countries themselves. India pointed out that the global south countries are caught between a declining multilateral capacity and growing global challenges. It pointed out to the UN being in a state of gridlock, citing threats to peace, stalled development, and human rights enforcement. It calls on urgent reform of key institutions, including the Security Council. India also further asserts its readiness to take up greater responsibilities, which, as a significant country, it has a really good claim to. South Africa declares its foreign policy as guided by not only its needs, but those of the people of Africa and the global south in general. So in South Africa, the foreign policy is already tied in with the global south. It highlights many of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development Goals as remaining elusive, and it criticizes very often the lack of sufficient funds. And from Brazil, we hear the president saying that multilateralism is at a crossroads, that there's a clear parallel between multilateralism and the weakening of democracy. Also mentioning clear attacks on sovereignty and arbitrary sanctions. So the global south, in general, there are a few channels that we can regard it as pushing as a whole, if there is such a thing, and that's institutional reform. It's the implementation gap, and then there's this question about sovereignty and agency of countries in the greater collective. And before I conclude, I just want to mention something that I regard as quite important is there are the perspectives that we are going to be speaking about, but then there's also the matter of action and what happens, what can the countries do? And I come from a bit of from the other side, a bit obscure perhaps, but I mentioned that how even though most states take their chances or their opportunities at the General Assembly to prop up and to give legitimacy to the United Nations, it's been interesting to see the United States changing its strategy quite deliberately in seeking to defund and to move against the United Nations. So it's actually quite a clear sign of what action can be done. And so this rejection is not just in saying something, it is also in delegitimizing the United Nations operations and withdrawing funds and issuing executive orders. Then the president issued a order in February 2025 saying that or stated as withdrawing the United States from and ending funding to certain United Nations organizations and reviewing its support to international organizations. So I think this is quite an interesting corollary to see what action looks like. And so for that matter, I would like our conversation to first focus on the views, the perspectives of the global South, and to discuss what these perspectives are and if where they align and cross. And then later we will move into more policy and more action oriented matters. So first of all, what are the perspectives of the global South on the United Nations? Is there anybody that would like to start the conversation? I see in the chat. No, there's not any. No hands up. There we go. Sorry, I'm working from my phone, so I'm going to try my best to see who. Okay, my phone doesn't show me who is actually. Okay, I see a hand, and the person. There we go.
Miklas,
Oh, it's
it's
Joseph.
me
Okay,
trying
yeah.
to yeah, get the discussion started.
Please, Joseph.
Thank you. I'll be a bit provocative in my first comment because I think one perspective of the Global South on the UN is it's a place where to negotiate with rich countries to get more development assistance or to get development assistance or climate finance, whatever, to extract things that they owe us because they're the colonial powers, they're the ones who use the systems of finance and trade and everything to their advantage. And I understand that. And I think there is a lot of a legitimate complaint there and the legitimate demand there. But at the same time, I see that's a waste of time in terms of negotiations forever, which don't lead to anything. The zero point 0.7 was never realized, will never be realized now with 5% European, whatever, military spending and all that. And at the same time, there is this turning away from the where the solution is actually in the country, I think, and what was discussed also in Financing for Development in Sevilla in the summer, that mobilizing own resources, creating like mobilizing nationally and locally and also regionally economies and exchanges that will make the system work independently of whether money comes or not from the rich countries, for example, which are also insecure and they have big debt and whatever, always find excuses not to share. So, yeah, I think that's a bad use of the UN up to now and makes it not a very constructive discussion over there. I don't know if the others agree or disagree or what you think. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Any responses to George's Matt? What George's rose? Because of course it's a very poignant matter. Is the United Nations just a trough where countries have come to seek resources in order to be legitimized in the international order? And does it serve its purpose? Does the United Nations still have a relevancy in the world that we really live in today? I would encourage anybody to come in at this moment, since we are trying to have the discussion as opposed to a presentation. Or any other views regarding finance or countries from the global south and their perspectives in what yes, Artur.
I can't claim to speak for the Global South, but I have spent most of my life working in and with the Global South, and in particular with the small island developing states. I spent more than a decade as their environmental advisor. I created a regional intergovernmental organization, the Pacific Green Environment Program, of all the 20 Pacific Island countries and territories. So I have a certain element of roots in the values and interests of the Global South, and particularly the the microstates, the countries with 9,000 population or 12,000 population, who for a long time were totally ignored. But when they became over 40 votes in the General Assembly together as a small island developing states, suddenly realized that they had a weight and a voice and were listened to, and more, they have a place at the table. So I think there's been a role there for the United Nations in their opening up to a wider set of perspectives. Maybe not in terms of the Secretary Council decisions on war and peace, but in many other areas. I think the UN has also played a very important role in the international conferences on themes relevant to the Global South, whether it be the Stockholm Conference in 1972 on the environment, where I participated for the Baha'i international community, whether it be the Rio Earth Summit 1992 and its Identified Action Plan. I was in the Secretariat, helped draft Agenda 21. So, and what, historians have said that what I put in was more than what the Global South dared ask for. So I was, in effect, expressing the values of the Global South in these documents. So I think there's been a lot of constructive work over many years in creating more perspectives than purely that of the economic system, which still dominates in many ways. And that's where you have the financing problem and the problem of the lack of corporate governance, where you now have much of the neo-colonial exploitation of the South is by corporations rather than by states. And there's no governance within the UN for those elements. So there's some enormous gaps in what's needed for global governance from that point of view. But also, I think given the blockages and the fact you probably can't see reform of the UN Charter because it is subject to the veto, the question really is, can we go to a second UN Charter? Can we come up with a better organization to replace this one that is failing, learn what we can from it, transfer what we can that's good from it to, but that means we need many more willing states, middle-class states or states from the Global South who are going to come together and build a better organization. And so maybe you leave aside the 5 permanent members, let them stay outside for a while till they feel they have to join it. But there may be a strategy there in terms of saying, well, certain two powerful governments are playing their own games, and we can simply set them aside, ignore them as far as we can, and build something better to take its place. So just a few ideas to share with this discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to hand over now to the next speaker, but I just want to have those 2 questions or 2 matters that you rose. I'm going to ask if there's any comments after that. This matter of the second United Nations Charter, if there are any views on that. And then I quite liked what you said about daring to ask for. Has that changed? Are we in a time where states dare to ask or dare to have their agency really felt? But I'll have that hang in the air for now when I'll hand over to Balkrishna.
So thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Arthur, for your very practical information. I attended many meetings of UN in Geneva and New York. And I have marked that the states of the South Asian, they're not in a position to speak prospectively or speak properly in the United Nations meeting. They cannot put forward their problems, economical problems, so many problems. Then I'm requesting that they should contact the NGOs in their country. And NGO and the government in the South Asian state, especially the middle income group countries, they should discuss with because as the bureaucrats, they are very busy. In other words, they are not busy. They are not doing any research work. So my suggestion to the South Asian state to consult or discuss with the NGOs, and they will do the research work of their country's problem. And with their support and the help of the NGOs in the respective country, the state of the South Asia, they can put forward actual practical problem what they are facing in their country. So thank you.
Thank you very much. My question to add to what you said, if the research is being done, is there the will for implementation? So the question again, is the United Nations fit for purpose? And then that matter of how do we move to a second United Nations Charter? Are there any views on this or what the previous speakers have mentioned? I don't see any hands up.
There is a hand if you cannot see it, Odile Bolton.
I'm sorry, I don't see any hands here. Oh, there we go. Odile, I beg your pardon.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Odile Bulten, based in Cape Town, retired from the United Nations, UNICEF in particular. So I'm going to try to be a little bit of the devil's advocate without being too biased. I think that most of the points have been made, and I think based on what Klaus said in his introduction, it is true that the UN was created in the aftermath of the Second World War. Now, we must acknowledge, despite the challenges and the current ones that we are going through, there hasn't been any war. We haven't had any Third World War so far. So I would say that in keeping to maintaining peace and trying to maybe prevent Third World War, the UN has, to some extent, complied with that mandate. A second point, and that is coming from being a former humanitarian worker, the UN has also saved many, many lives through the humanitarian work that it has done via the special agencies, the humanitarian agencies, your WHO, your UNICEF, and so on. So I think these are things that need to be recognized. And of course, challenges must also be recognized in terms of the geostrategic tensions, the multilateralism falling apart, and all the issues that we are aware of. But the UN still remains the only forum in the world that brings us together as humanity and as the world to be able to address some of these issues. It needs to evolve. I mean, it is 80 years old, so therefore being fit for purpose needs to be reconsidered and maybe revised. We know that at this point with the UN80 reform agenda, there will be some reform in terms of the institution and the different sectors that cover peace, security, and so on, because of a big withdrawal of funding from the United States. So I think that we should still consider the UN as a valid world body to address some of these challenges, but keep on pushing with more inclusion in terms of reform on the Security Council. I agree the P5s have to be reformed. And I think the G20 is also trying through their, let's say, agenda to push for that, reform of the multilateral funding organization and so on. So reinventing a new body or creating a parallel structure, I don't think would work. It's still a question, again, of the powers. There is a vacuum now, which is being taken over, well, more or less by China, which is being accused of, trying to create a parallel world or parallel kind of governance with their new governance initiative. But overall, the structures are there. They just need to be adjusted to contemporary issues, to reviewing multilateralism, and to reviewing how do we move forward without being delayed by some states, some member states that are intentionally reducing their funding, pulling out of global agreements, the Paris Agreement on climate, and other institutions. We need to move forward from that. It's a given now. They don't want to be part of a multilateral world. So how do we move from that and continue working with those who want to continue to be part of that group? So that would be my kind of a moving forward and saying, well, it's going to be happening for the next 4 years because the administration that we have in the States at the moment will be dismantling everything that they can until they go, including what's going to be presented at the G20 in a couple of weeks in Johannesburg. So we need to rethink how do we interact and move those multilateral agenda issues and challenges with those who are willing, I would say the coalition of the willing or the coalition of the well-doers. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. A lot of food for thought. You mentioned reviewing and reviving. My question to the group is there a global South view on what that would look like? And if not comprehensively, are there perhaps some examples that anybody would like to mention or to take on from what the previous speakers just mentioned? Yes, Gary, please. Gary?
Yeah, it took me a second to unmute. Thanks very much. So, yeah, I'm very much aligned with what Dale had to say just now. I'm a physician. My experience is with World Health, and in that experience, it was largely with East and Central Africa and in Asia. And I'm living in the U.S. now, and I'm seeing the UN as more important than ever, but unable to fulfill itself. And I'm seeing the voices of the South being more important than ever because of the bad behavior of the North. And these few voices that we've heard, for example, at the last General Assembly by the former President of Colombia, just as an example, to remind us of a world, a mentality, and set of ethics and values to which certain players are disrupting the world order now. And so this is one of the most important, if not the most important forum for that. Because one of the reasons, or you could say the main reason for its disability right now is the behavior of the North or the West. And it's not all players, but some of the major players, in particular the US now, of course, and Russia before that. I think that if the leadership, if good leadership can come to be, and the right voices come to be, what's needed at this point is pushback and some mechanisms that allow for pushback and that allow for go around and that also focus on the conflicts, the use of violence, which is not just in the North, but is the corrupt governance and the human rights abuses within countries and across countries. So more than ever, we need a set of voices that can come from many places, many corners of the world to push back. And in terms of, the implementation of various things and where the money comes from, there needs to be some creativity right now because not all corporate and all wealth and all multi-billionaires are unavailable. I just don't know how well they're being approached. And if they feel that they're being approached by an organization or set of organizations that has validity and competence and effectiveness and efficiency. And so, the last thing I want to say is that, there's been a lot of success by collaboration between the UN and NGOs, including international NGOs, for example, Gavi, or, UNAIDS or PEPFAR, or, in fact, the child mortality revolution of Jim Grant, led by UNICEF, the smallpox campaign, which was very much funded by some wealth as well as by implementation by the UN. So there's a lot of, there's some campaign successes also that have changed the life of billions of people. And they need also to be, the world needs to be reminded, the younger generation needs to be reminded that people didn't always have vaccines, didn't always live into their 70s or 80s or 90s, etc. And that, many of these diseases have been disappearing. And so we need to recapture that and to carry the violence agenda similar to the agenda of these prior, misunderstood phenomenon until they became understood and tackled. So there's too many countries, too many people with the right ideas to not capture that into a leadership and a movement or set of movements.
Yeah, I was just going to comment on that it sounds that you're speaking about leadership and to be reminded of the successes, which are abundant. And my question is, of course, if anybody would like to follow up on what Gary said, but then also, how does the UN respond to the US or to these states that are behaving in this way? Through leadership, of course, driving, but what would that look like?
For one, some truth telling.
Is that from the Secretary General, or where do you?
Multiple voices. Multiple voices, same message. I mean, we in the epidemic field, we're always surrounded by disinformation and misinformation. And I hired a number of communication experts to deal with that, with the con artists and whatever, and the corruption. And what I learned is to put the right stuff out. In fact, I was told by Farak El-Kamel, who I hired from Egypt, that just put the right stuff in at 4 or 5% level, multiple messengers, same message, and stop fighting the nonsense out there. Put the right stuff out there. Multiple voices, same message, over and over and over and over and over again.
Georgios, like to come in?
Yes, thank you, Klaus. Very interesting thoughts and questions from everybody. I will address the issue of leadership a bit because we have done previous work and discussions, even in this series of consultations about the role of middle powers, who can really, right, take on themselves and has the moral authority and decent resources to be able to advance a more enlightened agenda, which is more inclusive also and all that, and really redefine globalization and multilateralism, which is necessary. And still hope that countries like South Africa, Brazil, and even Japan and Germany, and the European Union, for me, I'm a citizen of the European Union, Greek and European, and Belgian. So if we can see that we are too small compared to the three big powers that we see now who can destroy the world, which is the US, Russia, and China, right? It seems. India is in between, but would like to join them probably. Instead of that, would they be able to work together and offer a collective sort of leadership, or at least a group that would push in the same direction? For charter change is not yet, I suppose, because of the veto that those P5 have. But as Arthur said, leaving them aside, not creating a new organization, but taking initiatives to the General Assembly. There are ways like the Uniting for Peace resolution, like special panels, envoys, and other things that the Secretary General is not using. He should be pushed to use such things. The General Assembly, they could create a Global Resilience Council, something that we have proposed in the past, not by changing the charter, but creating as a committee of ECOSOC, for example, and focus on implementing things on climate, on pandemics, etc., in a more organized way. So I think there are ways if there is leadership, but still they lose their time again trying to get permanent seats on the Security Council, perhaps with veto, which would completely block any decision if we had more countries on that council thinking that they're big powers that they're entitled to a veto, or even if they're not, things change this concept of a permanent power anyway. For me, it's not the right thing to fight for. Would they be, and do they feel any pressure from their people, from NGOs? It was mentioned before to go in that direction, or we're trying to return to the previous liberal situation, which was not ideal for me either. With President Trump and his approach, we may have reached the bottom, but The previously, even with again American leadership, which was more enlightened, it was about self-interest and it was about keeping this demander attitude from the South, asking, giving them a bit, and pushing an agenda of the West and the North, which is not doesn't respond really to the needs, I think, of the people of the South. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Georgios. Any other comments? Perhaps from somebody that...
There is a question in the chat. I'm sorry for intervening because you may not be able
No,
to see it.
please.
By Hema Chandra Masapa. Can you read it?
I have a problem with my... There we go. Okay. Oh, okay. I can read the question in the chat. From my understanding, this is coming from Hemachanda. From my understanding, the ruling elites and the administrators in most of the countries of the South look towards GDP growth and not consider their people's true incomes. Secondly, most of the elite chase after the lifestyles of the richer nations, with serious border problems and an equal power neighbor. A large percentage of our revenues go towards a strong defensive or offensive army to challenge another poor nation. Most of our trade is with the rich nations and depend on their handouts. Finally, whenever assistance of funds provided come with any attachments or open for us to choose what we use it for. That was in the chat. Are there any responses to that question? Gary, please go ahead.
I'll be brief. I just want to say that these are the norms are shifting. And that's what's happening. It's becoming more normal to be and acceptable to attack your neighbor or to live in violence even. And so that's what the way that norms shift back is by pushing back. And so that I'm just addressing that one singular thing about, yes, these are all the things that are getting worse. And that's the direction that things get. If there's more chaos, if there's more litter, if there's more use of fossil fuels, if there's more violence, we need to push back. And by examples, by rejecting this, admonishing it, disapproving of it, whatever, we're dealing largely with the mind, the global mind, in a way, as to what is an acceptable world and what is unacceptable, or even in your own community.
Absolutely.
I mean, we're seeing a lot of this in the U.S. now. I'm in Chicago right now, which is famous for a new thing, which is being attacked from within by the current administration with masked agents, that come from another era in a way. And the pushback on this is amazing. I mean, what the citizens are doing to push back on these unwanted attackers and kidnappers, it's really amazing in voice and in presence. And the individuals involved in these activities, some of them are waking up, some of them are backing off, some of them are being shamed. You can see it on, I don't know if you watch some of these. I spent too much time looking at, and this, but it's very encouraging because most human beings, until you've completely lost your empathy centers and the connections, most human beings can be awakened by the right scripts. How do you really feel at night about what you're doing? I mean, whatever. There's all kind. We don't do this anymore. This is our community. Leave us alone. I mean, there's simple scripts for the shaming and, in fact, even humiliating. And sometimes this works, sometimes not. But I forget what the question was. And it's about norms is what woke me up, is that we have to reestablish global norms. And that's what the UN Charter was about. That's what the success of the last 70 or 80 years have been largely, not perfectly, but certainly to a certain extent. And it's also some of the failures because, as various things started to change in the war in Syria and they became acceptable, or some of the experiments that were done by in Eastern Europe, in Crimea and Georgia and so on, these kind of things just kind of like leaked into becoming, oh, rather than, this is completely unacceptable.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Let's ask Lerato. Would you like to come in?
Yeah, thanks. Hi, can you hear me?
Absolutely.
Thanks. I think, colleagues, we need to, these are fantastic forums. Thank you, first of all, again, for hosting them. But I think that we have a very sound grasp and idea as to what are the issues and the challenges on a multilateral scale, especially within the context of the United Nations. I think we need to really start deciding how many steps in an implementative plan we want to engage in. So you've got there's an emergency within the Security Council. There's a broader reform issue, let's say within the UNGA. There's a massive funding one as a third option then. I think we need to start deciding which of, let me hypothetically, if these were the three issues, which one are we going to play to try and go first with? And then also, who's going to tackle what? Because a lot of the issue and the battle that I think is happening right now, and again, I'm in the global south, I'm in South Africa, but a lot of the issues that we are witnessing as well is that a lot of the crisis that the United Nations has been experiencing right now has been a lot of the issues that global south countries have been mentioning for the past 2 decades. Specifically with issues of funding, specifically with issues of the vetoing power, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it seems as though now we're in the emergency room. And I think as global south powers, and then also as middle income countries, and then also as first world countries, we need to decide who's going to tackle what. And we need to start setting down a timeline to implement these plans, because we are really behind the clock now. Time has surpassed us, and we are in the emergency room of global governance, with the G20 that we are hosting in under 2 weeks' time being one of the last semblances of normalcy I think we're going to see for the next 12 months.
No, absolutely. I saw a hand, but now it's gone. Anybody would like to come in? Otherwise, I wanted to ask Georgios to perhaps, Lerato reminded me as she was speaking, she said something about a specific plan, and then I thought about the Global Resilience Council and your suggestions of that. Perhaps you would like to share with the group just what that suggestion is, or yeah?
Yes, sure. We have actually put it forward to the T20 also as one blog that they asked us to write. And it has been supported by your Institute, Klaus, ISI, with a lot of articles in the press, and we are very grateful for that. The idea of a Global Resilience Council is that we'd focus more on human security instead of insisting on hard security. Of course, we were saying that before the wars in Ukraine and in Gaza, and after that, perhaps it has shifted again the attention to hard security. But human security is always there and concerns the majority still of the people on this planet. And we thought that, like the Security Council, we would have a Human Security Council. We can call it Global Resilience Council, because resilience in the face of adversity is a major thing that, especially for those who are not well off and they are hit by climate change more, although they've not caused it. They are hit more by pandemics, by financial and other systems that don't work for them. So if we had there a group of people representative of regions and of levels of development and all that, who really thought through how to implement this Paris Agreement, not just every year trying to renegotiate a small thing, but really, what are the areas suffering the most? Let's say the Caribbean and the Pacific and Southeast Asia, whatever. What do we do measure specifically for that? And what do we do, of course, for carbon pricing and all this with a more compulsory jurisdiction, if possible, like the Security Council. The Security Council can impose sanctions, can do this and that under Chapter 7 of the Charter. You wouldn't have that for something created under ECOSOC. Like it was a proposal. Eventually, we reworked the concept together with the ISI and um, the Institute for from Global Dialogue of the University of South Africa, if I remember correctly, the the title of the institute, another South African institute. We worked it out together. For ECOSOC could create the subsidiary body, no charter amendment needed, and it could be a sub group of the ECOSOC membership, because ECOSOC has 54 members, and eventually everybody goes from the 193. It's good to be democratic and representative. It's also important to have some kind of a more action-oriented body that can take decisions. And we thought for this human security area, it would be a way to go. I think President Lula proposed something similar about like economic or other council. Arthur has and others have proposed more like the earth earth security, or something like Earth Protection Council. For me, those, because they give more emphasis, they put more emphasis on the environment, at least in their title. They lose a bit the eco or the social part. So it has to be eco-social, not only ecological, but also social. People have to be there, and human security or comprehensive security would be something that I think we should focus on through a body like the Global Resilience Council, or call it whatever you want, but something in that direction that would focus minds. Sorry for talking too much, but I hope somebody takes it up from the powers that be. Thanks.
Thank you, Georgios. Lerato, is your hand up again, or is that just from the previous comment that you made? Okay, I'm not sure. So, Odile, would you like to come in, please? You are muted.
Yeah, sorry about that. Just picking up on what George just said, the idea of a council and of looking at having very specific focus, I have a feeling that it would kind of take away and create additional forums or agencies or councils. The UN and the specific agencies, the specialized agencies, they all have a mandate. And I think the overall UN 80, let's say, reform is looking at the different pillars that are specifically of the mandate of the UN, including all the specific mandated agencies, and trying to actually make them a little bit more action-oriented, like you suggested. Because all these councils and so on are again going to be taking member states. It's again going to be the North, the South, and so on. So I would favor more of a drastic reform or a drastic review of the existing institutions and making them much more efficient. I mean, we keep saying, is the UN fit for purpose? No, we all agree on that. So what is needed? We have the UN 80 reform that is now going through. They're reviewing it. It's been proposed to member states. We also have alternative forums like the BRICS, like the G20, like now the Global Governance Initiative created by China, because there is this vacuum created by the fact that the US is coming out of everything. And then we think, oh, we need to recreate new things. For me, recreating is not so much the point. It's actually taking out what is not working anymore, What is obsolete, because we are now 80 years old, and most of these, even the BRICS and so on, they are evolving. These are evolving institutions and entities. And how do we make them fit for purpose? Of course, it's a lot of dialogue. It's a lot of, let's say, negotiations. It's a lot of push. Like Gary said, it's also a lot of what you put out there in terms of the message. And again, we are now governed by big tech. We are governed by all these media platforms that are putting out all types of propaganda. And AI is, again, another kind of threat, even though there are some positive aspects to it. So it's reclaiming those initial, let's say, mandates and good positive points that we have taken along the years and see, okay, now we have evolved, now we are going forward. How do we reshape them? And I think it is happening at this point. I believe that there's been a lot of discussions, a lot of papers written, and I'm really putting a lot of hope in the G20 to actually pursue those goals and try to really make them global in terms of how we're going to implement. So now the level of implementation, how do we go about that? Is it at the national level that it becomes refined, where if we agree on the major reform that needs to be made, what would be the conduit to do that? Is it going to be, we also have the Pact of the Future. How do we do that? The instruments for me are there. The institutions are there. It's just now, how do we get a bit more of a overall plan to agree on, like Lerato said, how do we implement? How do we take forward all of these issues that we have recognized are the challenges? We have proposed solutions. And yesterday, I believe that, or the day before, the president of South Africa received the report on inequality from Professor Stiglitz, where he is looking at the level of inequality that is growing even more than we ever imagined. So now, how are we going to put in place or implement the recommendations? So do we review the institutions and make them more proactive and more implementable on the ground? So that might be, again, linked to the UN80 reform, where the UN is now very clear that they need to change, they need to reform. So how do we support those reforms? By putting in specific implementation and action points that we want to be implemented, whether it's by the UNGA, by some of the committees. There are very specific committees at the UN that do follow on these different topics. So for me, it's a bit of an overhaul, and trying to say, okay, what do we discard and what do we take on from the challenges we have identified and the recommendations that we have made, and who can implement what, and how do we, in a time frame, do that, and of course, monitor implementation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Georgios, would you like to come in?
Yes, and I thank Odile. She reminded me that this Global Resilience Council, as we have conceived it, also would have organized ways of interacting with civil society, with the private sector and other stakeholders. So it would be an improvement and not just only a member state body. Of course, the decisions should be made by states because they have the responsibility to their people, towards their people, right? And they also manage the resources of their people, and they should use them wisely. But you're right. I mean, it's not only member states, but I would also say what Arthur has written now in the chat about the coordination of the system. We cannot go back to a state that everybody does their own small thing, but nobody sees the big picture. And I have worked for the CB, the Chief Executive's Board for Coordination of the UN system, and I saw how difficult it is if everybody's fighting for their own resources, and when the limited resources get even more limited, then UNICEF and UNDP and others would fight for them, and they would not behave as a system. Also, what supports them is, for WHO, the health ministries; for UNESCO, it's the education ministries, right? For this and that, there are corresponding agencies in national governments that they get their budgets also from the national governments, these agencies, but they are not coordinated. And New York has lost the game a bit because they have people only from the foreign ministries and they try to negotiate commas and dots instead of really having a true understanding of operationalizing things. You cannot ask diplomats to operationalize things. That's what I realize. Probably you would have, I don't know, also an engineer and I feel somehow I have I want to see a result. Sometimes the result for the negotiators in New York is just writing a better text, which mentions one word that the government is very passionate about, but then it's not implementation. So I think there is a lot that has to be changed. The UN is too big in some respects, too many agencies. I think all that is reasonable, and the current reform process does not take all that into account because it's in response mainly to the expected shortage, lack of funding, and not to any thinking of how a global body would work to deliver for the people. And I think we're not there yet, but it's good that we're discussing it for sure. And the G20 finally, I don't know how it's going to work next year. The US is not coming to this year's G20 to take over from South Africa or to, so we'll see how that works. Thanks.
Thank you very much. My question to the group is, how do we make reforms implementable? Is there anybody with expertise or with ideas on this? Odile, please come in.
Yeah, sorry, I don't want to monopolize the conversation, but that would be from my experience working with UNICEF. A few years back, the UN went through this overall reform where what you says, Georgios, about, well, UNDP is fighting for the resources, UNICEF and all the other agencies, funds and programs, where one of the good outcome of the UN reform when the UNSG Guterres came and took over was to actually get the agencies together and at the country level, because New York is one thing, Geneva is one thing, it's the political, it's the debate and it's the discussions. But implementation level at the country level is a totally different things. And basically, in terms of streamlining how the agencies operate in a country, I mean, it's still work in progress, but I think it has improved a lot because when you look at the programming component of, let's say, the 5-year programs with the governments, agencies sit down together with the government and look at budget and look at how we can plan aligning on the priorities of government. No longer as before, well, this is what is happening and such government must do this or that. So there has been let's say, a departure from top bottom, but rather sitting with government, looking at their priorities, and then budgeting for that. Someone mentioned earlier Gavi. There is also the Global Fund. There are all of these different donors where you work with government and you work with them also investing, whether it's in education or health or the different basic social services. So there's been a big effort in that. And having worked in the field, I can say that there has been a lot of changes in how you implement and how you work with government and how you streamline resources. So on a country level basis. Now, at the higher level, it is a different story because, again, it's member states, it's political, more than actually impacting on the ground. But I think the agencies that are operational on the ground have had to actually come together, look at budgets. I mean, I've been part of those at some point. So I would separate a little bit implementation at the country level and the higher sphere at the global level of all of the bigger discussions at that point. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't see any other hands, so I'm going to go, unless there's somebody that'd like to come in now, then I'm going to go to the chat. As I see there are a few comments made there or questions I'll see. We have somebody asking or mentioning that civil society must continue to advocate for a stronger, restructured UN for the interest of all members, particularly those of the Global South, okay? That's just a comment. And then, are most of the nation states of the South free to express their opinions? This is an interesting question. Secondly, how much do each of us know about the countries in the South? Our media coverage is limited and we somehow take things for granted at what is happening in our nations and do not know much of each other. Will the UN be forced to reform itself when funds are reduced for the activities and be able to concentrate on the issues which makes a difference to a larger number of nations? Okay, these are slightly different to the line of our thinking and discussion at the moment, but they do bring the agency, or at least the focus, back directly to the global South. And as that, yes, we have I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your name. Oh, I think it's just the Kadoi Center, Koi Dai Center, the all-seeing eye. Would you like to come in?
Oh, yeah. Well, thank you. I think it's very difficult. Sorry, it's quite kind of noisy. It's raining over here. So I don't think there is an answer, a definite answer to the current problems, like, related to the major issues of the UN, like the UN Charter, the Security Council, and the government politics, and all those kinds of issues. There is no easy answer or easy solution to those kinds of issues, because they're global, and they're big, and they're complex as well. And so for sure, the major countries, major powers would like to retain their power. And, most of the time, they would like to have control in their hands. So it's not easy to sway them. And countries are moving towards, over time, they're moving towards multipolar structure. Like the US is now, with Trump administration, they're isolating themselves, they're serving their own interests. And then Russia, everybody knows what's happening over the last few years. And then China is, of course, is trying to build kind of their own global governance. And so, the world is falling apart. There's no easy answer. There's no, definite solution to pull everyone together. But the UN is, of course, the UN must stay, because they have been functioning quite well, right, in many areas, despite many, still many drawbacks. But nobody is perfect, right? No organization is perfect, for sure. So, the point is, and because now the world is, as everybody is saying, the world is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. So, there is no easy answer, no easy solution to anything, especially global issues. And so, I think, and in terms of the SDGs, which are the main goals of the UN, we are falling far and far behind. So that's another issue to talk about, to address. And so I don't think, for the current world, although things are getting better, like some people have mentioned here, things are getting better over the years. But at the same time, many things are getting, more volatile, uncertain, vigorous, and etc. So we can solve certain issues, but new issues keep popping up, somewhere and somehow. And so, at our center, we don't say that we have a solution to all of the current issues. We propose a solution for a new world. For a new world, it's not for the current world, but that's for the future. It's not for now. So for now, all I can say to, to all of us is good luck. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, thank you for your well wishing. Well, at least I would agree. I think everybody would agree that the no easy answers and the volatility. But I mean that again asks for action. And I would like to provoke the following: is that if we see the major countries acting, in particular, again using the example of the United States, which I think we shouldn't confuse just with the administration, but if the major countries, Russia, of course, and China, those three have been mentioned. What can the South, or at least some of the middle powers or the global South, as we spoke earlier, do to enact their power? Because it sounds like the South can only ask for handouts, but surely leadership can come from the South as well. How is that possible? What would that look like? The question for today is around this idea of the global South and the rise of the global South. And we heard earlier also comments on BRICS, and that BRICS is acting in what is considered a vacuum, or at least not a vacuum, but in replacing the United Nations. So maybe thoughts on BRICS. And Arthur, would you like to come in, or Arthur?
Well, I think there's the global South is trapped in the neocolonial economic system, where it's seen as a source of resources, but so we have extraction of resources for the benefit of the global North, and you have financial transfers to the global North from the South in debt repayments and so on. So the whole structure is weighted against the global South taking any kind of leadership. I think the real challenge would be to what extent can the global South create its own more coherent economies, either nationally or regionally, that become more self-sustaining and less dependent on the North. There may be some challenges with intellectual property, which again is often seized in the North and prevents technology transfer. So finding some ways of working around that areas. So I think if the global South can already show some leadership in terms of creating more autonomy and becoming less dependent on these neo-colonial structures, that will then empower it to do more for its own populations and to have the capacity to provide greater leadership among the states of the South themselves. Part of that may be through regional groupings, whether it be in Latin America or in Africa or Southeast Asia, to build more strength on a regional basis. And to have some weight against the weight from the North. But there are some areas where I think there's potential to free up to be able to create more leadership from the global South. Thank you.
Indeed, but is that not then creating greater autonomy, working together on regional level? What does that say for the United Nations? What is the impact on the United Nations in that regard?
Well, the United Nations has a regional approach in many ways, and therefore, like there also can be ways in which one would be those groupings could, within, say, the General Assembly, speak more as a voice, and therefore carry many more votes in the General Assembly and empower the General Assembly to be more coherent in decisions it takes at its own level. I also, for a number of years, I helped to manage the Regional Seas program in UNEP, and that was bringing together all the countries around a particular sea area to work together to manage their share of resources. The UN has built regional capacities, and they've worked very well. And I think those are ways in which it can be totally compatible with a global multilateral approach to also have stronger pillars adapted to the needs of each region. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other views on that matter? Or any other matter? See if there's something in the chat. Okay, I see there's a discussion taking place in the chat. Yes, Georgios, please.
I don't want to continue the discussion with Adil. I mean, I'm sure we have a lot of interesting things to say, and we don't, yeah, we perhaps accentuate the differences, but we have a lot in common, of course. But yeah, it's an argument. But I want to say something about what Arthur said about the regional organizations. Of course, the UN has the regional commissions, but there are also regional integration organizations, and I'm not sure how they could be, let's say, made compatible necessarily. If, for example, the African Union really includes the whole of the African continent, do you need the Economic Commission for Africa also? And does it make sense, let's say, yeah? Or do you bring the African Union as a major player on the Security Council, on the Global Resilience Council, if you make it or not, or wherever in the General Assembly, and then the UN is what brings everybody to the global level again and tries to reconcile regional also interests. So I'm not convinced that the UN and regional integration can go hand in hand. If regional integration goes as those who imagined it really achieve it, if like in the European Union, European integration, African integration, then the UN is not exactly needed there, but it's needed to make sure that the European Union does not fight with Russia, which is it's doing indirectly now, or with China, or with the US, or with Africa. Again, that would be higher level order. So yeah, it's a bit academic, of course, this one, and futuristic, but that's my thinking. Thanks.
Of course. Is there perhaps anything from somebody who hasn't mentioned anything today so we can hear your voices as well? Of course. So I'm coming back to leadership the whole time, and what can be done within the United Nations as it is, and then I look at the G20 that is lying ahead, and I know it's separate from the United Nations, but the G20 has taken on a very important role over the last few years, and unfortunately we have to now have this the work of the G20 and the promise thereof, and even the leadership of the South African team be overshadowed by the tactics of the United States. But I'm wondering if anybody would like to speak on the G20, that what their thoughts are, what it might entail, and then of course what lies ahead for it. Because if the Americans are pulling out, and what it seems like pulling out, what does that mean about their leadership next year? Don't see. Have I not been provocative enough? Nope, I still don't see anybody. Okay, Lerato, please. The fellow South African.
In the sync with costing and planning. I think that it's important to contextualize as well what is happening with the United States domestically, and then also to divorce that from what it's ventilating externally into the global community, and specifically within the context of multilateral institutions like the United States. I think it's also very much, as you're saying, that middle powers like South Africa and Norway and Germany, etc., 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 really need to also become the access of the balance of power now. And it's about figuring out how do we collectively consolidate our individual pockets of power to sort of be a needle point for multilateralism to walk around. I think that we cannot wait for the United States to get itself together. 4 years is a very, very long time. We've seen what can happen in just 6 months in this continent alone. You want to times that by whatever, 4, 5, 6 times over, we are going to be in an absolute catastrophic state. I think we are also learning about the fragility of democracy within the continental United States, and also about perhaps how the United States has overestimated its own position and place in the world. And the emergence of China as a major superpower and the development of lower global south countries formulating groupings like BRICS, etc., is another indication that power is not unilateral. And it is not one-dimensional. It is multi-dimensional and it is multilateral as well. So I think that it's best not to wait for them to get their house in order. And yes, there are many very serious provocations, economic ones, defense ones, political ones that are being vacillated outwardly. But in spite of that, I think that, as I said to you before, everybody's going to have to sort of see how they can best strategize and or anchor and or direct their own pockets of power to see how much stability and growth and also newness of governance frameworks and systems within the multilateral order we can collectively create.
Thank you very much. I see Ingeborg has raised her hand. Please.
Yes, good evening or good afternoon. I'm thinking that our main problem in the UN is a problem that the League of Nations also ran into, and that is the problem of the power of the big ones. And I definitely think that we should not praise too much the G20 because they should put their emphasis into the UN and use their energy and resources inside and not outside. So I'm very skeptical to the gathering of the G20. So I definitely hope that it could vanish now with the lack of interest from the UN, from the US. But as for the South, coming from the North, what I hope for is that the South would bring into the overall geopolitical situation some new inspiration, because the North is so polarized between NATO, the West, and Russia and China on the other hand. So I'm thinking when the decolonialization took place, I mean, Ghana, Yugoslavia, India, inspired by the voices that insisted on not being part of either the one or the other of these big powers, and instead come up with the non-aligned neutral movement. So isn't that a way to go, to search for inspiration within the UN system, but coming from the South? At least that is my hope for the time being. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Georgios?
Yeah, right. Similar thinking there about the G20. I think it is of course, it may bring together 80% of the world's GDP and I know a lot of population also, to be honest, but it's outside the UN framework. It is also temperamental who participates. Now we hear from the US not only that they won't participate in this Johannesburg summit, but they will not, they don't even want South Africa to be part of it, right? So, I mean, who decides who? I think it was the American president who convened it at the head of state level in 2008, 2009 to deal with the financial crisis, the G20. And that was effective at the time, but since it's just another forum for blah blah for me, meaning not much changes in practice, and the UN remains the only legitimate global forum that has to be improved. But if it's something going to happen for everybody, for the good of everybody, that would be through the UN and not through the G20. So yeah, we have to be careful what we're asking for, and we should stop this, I think, forum something or market place, where today we have the G20, then the whole NGO community and the experts write things about the G20 so that they agree on that. Then we go to We go to Belém yesterday. It's part of the UN, but again, it's like this small fora, the social summit, this and that, and we are busy, but not achieving much. It's just big parties almost. And for the civil society, I also feel sometimes that either it's not representative a lot because in the north and the south there are individuals like for FOGGS, for example, it's more like a think tank. Is it civil society? We had 8 members on our board and all the friends who came, but what legitimizes us to attack, let's say, a government, for example, or the UN? Okay, it's relevant. It's relative. We have the goodwill or the interest, so we're part of this conversation, but not whoever declares is a part of the conversation. Even it's a forum like the G20 has to master the world. So the only thing I can see as legitimate is the UN, still, through its processes and its inclusion of all countries basically, and a couple more who have to join, Palestine for sure. And they should be doing their work, and we have to remind them of that, push through our governments, and not expect others to do that job, I think, because we'll be disappointed. And even if the G20 takes it on themselves, I would not trust them to do it legitimately or transparently. Thanks.
Thank you, Georgios. Gary?
I have a variation of how, or maybe it's actually just a normal way of thinking about this. So, we in the US have a North and a South. We have this ruling class, and we have the people. And the South, to a certain extent, this is a generalization, are the people. And they have to, I would like to see the South assert its power within the UN. I don't know how this is done, but I know that communication and voices and solidarity are relevant, and that division is a problem. So the two things that always hurt movements are division and being quote unquote too radical, and of course violence. So a solidarity of the South around 2 or 3 main issues, including its own power, are how to do this, I don't know. I mean, it's a movement. It should be thought of as a movement. And then in terms of, the going back to what Odile said, and I had mentioned it before, in terms of implementation of very effective things that are needed, we have examples in the world of enormous successes. Some of this is at country level, as was described how to do this, including the collective action of UN actors, but also these movements, the smallpox campaign, the Global Fund, all the PEPFAR, Gavi, these are vertical movements with very specific goals. And these are the examples of the greatest successes of or alongside or within the UN system. So those are the implementation examples that we have of empirical, objective, measurable successes. And then within the UN, it's I'm going back to where I started. It's a power struggle to be thought of as a movement, which is political and social and communication and consistent and persistent with leadership, and not just one leader, a number of leaders. And there's so many examples of successful movements of reversing bad leadership or oppressive leadership, within a country. And now we're dealing within an organization that represents countries. So those are the ways that I think about these questions. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very, very much. And to echo some of what you've said, I totally agree about this over infatuation on the great powers and letting them capture the narrative and have everybody only respond in kind, and that there's this need for new ideas, for vision rooted in solidarity that comes from the people. And I quite appreciate your distinction also with the North and the South idea of the establishment or the powers that be, and then the people, and have the United Nations be revived through the implementation of these programs, and to remind the world of the successes that there have been, because unless we do that, it's again just going back to saying, oh, what has Trump done, or what is China going to do, and forgetting about the real successes that have been achieved by the United Nations in the last 80 years, and to make it, to renew it, to be fit for purpose and relevant in the world that we live in today.
The success on dealing with bullies is pushing back.
Indeed, pushing back, consolidating voice, and yeah, thank you for that. I see that it's exactly 5:30, at least in South Africa, meaning an hour and a half, or I believe, 4:30 Brussels time. I would like to ask if there are any other comments or any other thoughts that you would like to end off. And if not, then I will just hand it back to Georgios.
It's for a technical thing. Thank you. Yes. Klaus, I don't know if you can see it. I want to share with you, we have agreed with Klaus and his institute, the institute that he represents, for the next discussion that also FOGGS will support in terms of registration. So you'll see our registration link here. But again, it will be chaired by the Global South Perspectives Network, and it is one of the ideas or the alternatives for global governance that we mentioned before. So we want to dissect China's global governance initiative and see pros and cons, and where would that stand with what is there already, and what would the augur for the future one way or another. There is an article written by the CEO of the Inclusive Society Institute, published in Katoikos, on this specific topic, and it would be good background reading for those who want to participate. And we hope all of you and more colleagues will participate for this discussion on the 8th of December at the same time. Yeah. So Klaus, if you want anything substantive, it's up to you if you want to say something.
No, thank you very much. I feel like I said my last say at the end. I just want to thank everybody for their contributions. We have a lot of work in front of us. I think that's what it comes down to.
Absolutely.
Thank you, George.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.